Today, we have a very special guest talking about a very important topic. We have with us Dr. Joellen Russell, who is a University Distinguished Professor at the University of Arizona. We're going to ask her some questions today about what's happening to our planet, how climate change is affecting heat. We're in for a very wonky summer of extremes. So, Dr. Russell, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good morning. Good morning. It's really exciting to be here with your amazing work, with our Daily Planet, et cetera. So cool. Everybody should follow you on Twitter like I do.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Go follow us on Twitter. Dr. Russell, I wanted to ask you, I know it's often difficult to attribute any one weather event directly to climate change, but in the past couple of weeks, we've seen record-breaking heat waves along the Pacific Northwest and across the rest of the country as well. So I wanted to ask, how much more common is extreme heat now? And are the signs of climate change there? Why are we experiencing 118 degrees in Canada, for instance?
These are predicted changes, from our climate model since the 1970s, really. They did an amazing job back then, basically saying, hey, more greenhouse gas forcing is really going to force us to warmer. But what it does with events, weather events, is that if everything were at equilibrium, half of the records we break would be cold records and half would be warm records. But today we see at least 2/3 of the records we're breaking are warm records, which is that tilt toward the global warming that we knew was going to happen. And that is, we're living through. Last summer here in Tucson, where I live in Arizona, where we're definitely feeling the heat. I think we're the 4th fastest warming city in the country. And I think Phoenix is the 3rd. We are deeply invested in these topics. Well, we had a record number of 100-degree days last summer. Our normal is 62. Our record was 98, and we had 108 last summer. And when you see all of Australia burning, record temperatures, burning both on land heat waves, marine heat waves that are causing mass coral death, at the same time, in the very next season, you see California burning, Arizona burning, Colorado burning. It is difficult to attribute an individual event, but when you see 2/3 of the records are all the warming, you understand that these were predicted from the basic math and physics, that now we're actually living the consequences of our greenhouse gas increase.
In terms of extreme heat, obviously it's very uncomfortable. It's very dangerous to people and the environment and to animals. But what are some other repercussions of extreme heat on the climate itself and the environment? What are the feedback loops that you're seeing?
Extreme heat is so scary. Last summer, I sent my kids out to ride their bikes thinking, I had their hats on, I had their sunscreen on, water bottles, and they went out to ride their bikes. And I thought, bike riding, it can't be too hot, right? They're moving, there'll be a breeze. And then my daughter came home with symptoms of heat stroke. We started walking the dogs at 5 a.m. because it was the only time that they could walk on the streets here without burning their feet. Adaptation is real. And it's not just that. It's like if your grandma cannot wait at the bus stop or for the granny van to pick her up to go to her doctor's appointment. She can't. It would hurt her. We've seen, they think, 54 deaths in Arizona associated with our most recent very extreme heats. And there are other consequences. Air quality decreases, not just because we're more likely to have wildfires, which then add more CO2 to the atmosphere. They also add particulates and smog. And our own smog cooks earlier and worse and makes it even more toxic, more asthma cases, et cetera. Of course, it's not just the burning. It's also heat is a stressor on trees. So as it gets warmer and warmer, forests, not just individual trees, stressed and dying because you put on a drought stress combined with a heat stress, they're just not survivable at those temperatures. We have what we call sky islands, mountains, where you can watch the butterflies moving their habitat up, but at some point you just can't. There are other things associated with heat too. Like, I don't know if people realize, but all this greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, thickening that blanket of pollution that's basically keeping us warmer and warmer and warmer. That energy imbalance at the top of the atmosphere grows every year, right? Meaning the same amount comes in, but less gets out. And 93% of what doesn't get out is in the ocean. And it's causing sea level to rise, not just because all the ice is melting in Greenland and Antarctica. Glacier National Park is going to be national park here pretty soon. It breaks my heart to see that we won't be giving our children the same amazing ice that we had as children. So we're seeing all these effects, changes in growing seasons, changes in precipitation, changes in drought, things like Hurricane Harvey. It's been shown that that would never have happened without the increased temperatures in the ocean, which made all that precipitation that flooded Houston so dangerous and so extreme. These are all predicted effects, things we've known since the 80s were going to happen, and now we're just living it.
On that note, I wanted to ask, where does the field of attribution science currently stands? To break it down to simple terms, how we can attribute events we're seeing, whether that's heat waves or, like you mentioned, Hurricane Harvey, to the footprints of climate change.
So they generally look at this from a likelihood perspective. You can run the model and see how likely is this event to occur. Most people don't realize climate models that were developed at the Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Laboratory at NOAA are now being used to forecast the weather at the National Weather Service. Climate includes our ocean, which is supercharging our storms with rainwater, et cetera. But I generally just like to look at those broken records. Are we more likely to break a high record than we are a low record? The conventional way to think about this is that the wet areas get wetter and the dry areas get drier. So you can even look at extremes in precipitation. And we're worried about what's going to happen with our wildfires. Here it comes. Everybody brace, 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 because we are so dry and so hot. Attribution as a individual event, we're just looking at how likely is it to actually create one of these events in a normal equilibrium, no extra greenhouse gases sort of simulation. And those can be done very quickly and very well. And you'll see that on the news all the time. In context, we know that we're breaking the records in sync with what we were expecting.
Unfortunately, yeah, no one should be surprised. But looking forward, we are in a year where we're going to have the next COP, the UN climate meeting in Glasgow later this year. It's really crunch time for the nations of the world to really commit to action on climate change, meaningful action and comprehensive action. Because in the last 150 years, we've warmed 1 degree Celsius. And I was reading that that was the equivalent of releasing the energy capacity of 1 million nuclear warheads into our atmosphere. But if we're talking about warming an additional 1 degree Celsius, what does that mean for humanity and life on this planet?
So I'm an oceanographer and climate modeler, and I study our climate from robot flow supercomputers and satellites to try and see what's going to happen next and observe what's happening today. What we're seeing is that we're supercharging our atmosphere, right? The lower atmosphere is warm between 1 and 2 degrees in the lower atmosphere, the weather part of the atmosphere, but where the planes fly in the stratosphere, it's been cooling because, of course, that the shortwave radiation warms the surface and then tries to re-radiate back out. And with all the extra greenhouse gas blanket, plus the feedback on the water vapor, which also is a greenhouse gas, basically you're ending up with it much warmer, which means the stratosphere has been cooling. So what drives our big westerlies is this gradient between the difference in the temperature between our upper atmosphere and our lower atmosphere. I know this is very nerdy. I apologize, but it's
we love it.
Think about it. If it were the sun changing, the entire atmosphere, top to bottom, would all be changing together because it's greenhouse gases. The lower atmosphere is warming and the upper atmosphere is cooling. And the upper atmosphere is cooling almost twice as fast as the lower atmosphere is warming. So when we see this global weirding that everybody's talking about, where we get these huge outbreaks of very cold, very vicious storms, sometimes in the winter where the polar vortex just breaks and sends all this incredibly cold air, everybody's like, well, what is that about? It's because our upper atmosphere that drives that polar vortex is cooling dramatically. Over the South Pole, it's 8 degrees colder than it was 50 years ago. This is huge. So you combine this very cold atmosphere over this very warming atmosphere, and you've got a supercharged atmosphere. The winds are picking up. Every single current in the ocean, every boundary current in the world ocean, except for one, which is up near Greenland, where all the fresh water is dumping in, every single current is speeding up. All of the organisms in the ocean are going deeper and trying to get to the poles. Everyone that can move is doing it. And you know why? Because if you were like a coral reef, like our Great Barrier Reef has been growing for 1 million years, more than half of it has significantly bleached already, and only a fraction is recovering. And the next big El Nino we have, it's going to be even worse. So when I look at that 1 degree of warming, and we can already see that half the Great Barrier Reef is gone, it's scary. Think about little conflicts. Maine lobsters, the Gulf of Maine, where, traditional lobster folk have been getting us our delicious seafood for so long. The lobster's range has moved north into Canadian waters. And now there's a conflict between the US and Canadian fisher folk because the lobsters like it cooler and they've moved away from the warming waters in the Gulf of Maine towards Canada. I am so pleased and delighted that the global community is working together to try and reduce the carbon pollution that's causing all of this damage. But I would like to see the US lead. I would like to see us step up like we did in World War II and actually lead both from the science and technology side, from prediction, from observations and adaptation, smart solutions. I don't want to see a bunch of greenwashing where they propose solutions that's just good for a particular kind of business rather than good for the planet. And so a lot of this work, I would love to see that green economy really explode as the next innovation in science and technology and engineering. Every single one of us is going to be needed, and there isn't a moment to lose.
Absolutely. What it certainly is the challenge of our generation. And I really hope we can meet it. We have the tools to, we just need the political will.
I know we can. More and more people, when they do those polls that say, do you think climate change is important? Yes, we do. So now we just have to get it across to, it needs to be part of what makes our decisions on our voting, where we donate and where we volunteer our time, as well as, making sure that our state, local, and federal representatives get off their rear ends and help us make some change here. We can stop this pollution. We can decarbonize our economy. We are almost 20% of our peak emissions of carbon here in the US, 20%. And we don't even have major legislation yet or a carbon tax or anything else, just individuals and companies making wise decisions to help us reduce that pollution. So we've grown our economy and decarbonized it at the same time. And I don't think anybody even noticed.
Well, Dr. Russell, thank you so much for joining us today. This was such an informative conversation, and I hope we can have you back to ask more questions.
I would love to. It's so nice to chat to you today.
Thank you. Really appreciate your time. And thank you for all of your work helping to better understand our planet so we can save it.